Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the National Library of Australia and to this special event, Played Strong, Done Good. Has Rugby League's expansion been successful? I'm Marie-Louise Ayres. It's my privilege to be the Director General of this National Library of Australia, and you may be very surprised to know this. I've never played rugby league. Oh, you don't have to laugh that much. I know who's laughing like that. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge, of course, Australia's First Nations peoples, the first Australians, as the traditional owners and custodians of this land, and give my respects to elders past and present, and through them to all Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Thank you for attending this event, in person or online, coming to you from the National Library building on beautiful Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. And for those who come into the library this evening, it is the most glorious sunset. We can see the outlines of our beautiful mountains and think about how long our culture, language, story has been tended on this country. So tonight's event is presented in association with the Tom Brock Bequest. The Tom Brock Bequest supports research into rugby league history and provides scholarship for researchers and also to host an annual lecture on rugby league history. So this year's events has been timed to coincide with the Australian Society for Sport History's conference, one day of which we've been really pleased to host here at the library today. And it also coincides with the launch of the library's new exhibition, Grit and Gold, Tales from a Sporting Nation. Our exhibition explores the library's collection of Australian sporting history material and celebrates Australia's sporting heritage and the effect on our culture over the years. The exhibition's on show at the library until the 5th of November, and we hope you'll take the time to have a wander through the exhibition following tonight's event. Now, Rugby League, as you'd expect, features quite prominently in the exhibition. Now, noting our green lights here tonight, I was reflecting today that I'm a Canberra girl, I grew up in Canberra, and I was reflecting today that although some of the boys that I went to school with played rugby league, my memory of Canberra as a kid and a teenager is very much as an AFL town. I was away at university from 1981 to 1986, and by the time I came back, it turned into Raiders territory. And if you'd been away, that change felt really quite profound. So I'll be happy to be corrected by Canberra sports historians, but I think it was a turning point, of course, in our city as well. So with us this evening, we're very fortunate to have Sia Soliola. Now, unfortunately, due to family commitments, Alan Tung was unable to join us, but Sia has kindly agreed to come off the bench and join our panel tonight. Sia has played a combined total of 336 matches across the NRL and Super League, with 130 of those matches for the Raiders over 7 seasons. And as well as playing 17 years of club football, Sia has played 12 test matches for New Zealand and 4 for Samoa. A tough, hard-running player, well-liked by fans, teammates and opponents, is certainly a good description. And post-football, Sia is the Wellbeing and Education Manager at the Raiders and gives his time to a number of community and charity organisations. Joining Sia on our panel is Wiradjuri woman Katrina Fanning. For over 25 years, Katrina has lived and breathed rugby league. Following a successful career as a player, she was appointed manager of the Indigenous Women's All-Stars team, chairperson of the Australian Rugby League Indigenous Council, and president of the Canberra and Australian Women's Rugby League Associations. And that's only a little bit of what Katrina has actually done in her life. Tim Gavel, and I've just confirmed we are actually neighbours. I drive past Tim's house every day and have done for 26 years. Tim will bring his broadcast expertise to bear in facilitating tonight's discussion about the expansion of rugby league over the last 20 years, beyond its strongholds in Sydney and Brisbane, to becoming a national code. As a sports commentator with ABC Grandstand for more than 30 years, Tim has called an unbelievable array of sports, of which rugby league is just one. For so long, Tim was the voice of sport, certainly that we heard here in Canberra. And Tim now works for Sports Integrity Australia as a media advisor. So before we throw to the panel, I'd like to invite a representative of the Tom Brock bequest, Andrew Moore, to say a few words on behalf of the bequest and to award their scholarship. Thanks very much, Andrew.
I'm a bit of a last-minute stand-in for Richard Cashman, who, if he's here, I'll never forgive him. But okay, right. Well, I will forgive you then, I guess. Yeah, my name is Andrew Moore. I'm not the Andrew Moore. We just checked into a hotel and there was a bit of confusion about that. The Andrew Moore who calls Rugby League on the ABC. My only claim to fame in Rugby League is that about 100 years ago I wrote the history of the North Sydney Bears, and a year or two after the book was published they had the bad grace to fall apart and disappear from the competition for a number of reasons that I won't go into here. And I have been a member of the Tom Brock committee, which I'll just explain a little bit about. It might not be the best known group. But anyway, we've been going since 1999 on money that was donated to the Australian Society for Sports History by Tom Brock, who is a great fan and historian of the South Sydney Rabbitohs. In fact, as we've recently established beyond all reasonable doubt, he gave $200,000 in his will to the South Sydney Rabbitohs, and he gave $200,000 to the Australian Society for Sports History to set up a group that would promote, and this always gets a bit of a laugh, the scholarly history of rugby league. Ho, ho, ho. But in fact, we argue that it's important to study the social history of sport. And sport is a really important topic in our country, and it shouldn't just be left to, sorry if you're all journalists, it shouldn't just be left to journalists and whoever. We historians are also very interested in football. It occurred to me I might know rather too much about football as I was walking around up the top and happened to recognise all of the players in that image of Balmain meeting the Queen in 1973, you know. C.D. Walsh and Keith Outen and whatever, but I mean that's the fate of the sports fan, isn't it? All this useless information. So we are still going, the Tom Brock Committee. Each year we have this this lecture, and we're just delighted to be reaching beyond Sydney. Thank you very much to Guy. Thank you very much to Mary Louise for hosting us tonight, and thank you very much indeed to our three panellists. That's very much appreciated. And I don't know much about the scholarship, so maybe I should hand over to Richard. Yes?
I think you said enough.
Oh, okay. The scholarship is in abeyance, but I'm sure it will be awarded. But it's a scholarship in which we pay a fair amount of money to a scholar who's interested in promoting the social history of rugby league, and we interpret that very generally. We've had all sorts of people presenting books, articles, plays, whatever, and we've been going since 1999. We must be doing something right. Thank you very much for your welcome, and I'll hand over now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you could write a thesis on the angst caused by the Canberra Raiders at the moment, leading by 18 and winning by 2. But as you walk in and you see that famous quote immortalised by Jack Gibson, and you think to yourself, gee, Jack Gibson, what an iconic image you have of that man as a rugby league coach and later as a commentator. My famous quote from Jack Gibson, just while we're on the topic, is when Barry Gomersall was refereeing a State of Origin game, and Jack reckoned that Barry Gomersall had an egg timer on him because he blew the whistle every 4 minutes. But anyway, so it's great to be talking about rugby league. If I was on Mastermind, Canberra Raiders would be my special subject, 1988 to the current day. But we are very fortunate to have two iconic figures in rugby league for varying reasons. Katrina Fanning played 26 tests for Australia, but was part of that inaugural first Australian women's side. And she's got a fascinating story about growing up in country New South Wales and the fact that not many women played rugby league back in those days. And Sia Soliola, who came across from New Zealand and made his debut as a 19-year-old in 2005 for the Roosters. You can imagine, just as a 19-year-old. And I do have memories of the likes of Brad Fittler playing Origin as a teenager, and Bradley Clyde as a teenager, Laurie Daly as a teenager playing State of Origin. And at 19, I could hardly tie up my shoelaces, let alone play State of Origin or play for my country. As Sia was selected as a 19-year-old in 2005, but was injured, unfortunately, but played the following year. So firstly, to you, Katrina, just on those early days growing up playing rugby league, and I guess you were regarded by many as the pioneer of women's rugby league in Australia.
Yeah, probably for two reasons. As an 8-year-old in June, wanting to play, because that's all anyone in town ever talked about was rugby league, so I thought, why can't I give it a go? The local club not really sure whether a girl was allowed to play or not. As it turned out, no one had thought that far ahead with the forms, so it just said player, it didn't say boys or girls. So I also, for people who don't know, June's not a huge town, and for some reason in my age group, there was not as many boys as they probably needed, and so they were a bit short of numbers. So they let me play. The first year, they didn't pass me the ball once in a whole season. But by the second year, they certainly did. And years later, when I asked them about that, I hadn't taken into account what it was like for them being the only team to have a girl in it, and some of the flack that they copped as well. So we've had some good yarns about that since. So got to 12, and that was the end of that, and really didn't give rugby league another thought. Didn't have any visibility of women playing at that stage, at least out in Group 9. Came to Canberra and was playing National League soccer for the ACT, and came across some women watching a Raiders game at the Irish Club, as it turned out, and they'd made a couple of off comments about Laurie, who's a cousin of mine, so I felt like I needed to defend his honour. And their basic response was, well, if you know so much, why don't you go and play? And I said, well, okay, I will. And got back into playing women's rugby league, and that was in early 1995, and by the end of the year I was lining up, well, actually by the 1st of July that year, at Lidcombe Oval to play the Kiwis for the first ever women's test match.
Because you played 14 seasons but only played 26 games, which is an indication of how few games there were for women. And I mean, we've got 10 teams for the upcoming NRLW season, but that's an increase of 4 from last year. So it's a slow burn, isn't it?
It is, but I was trying to do some, because the records back in my under-8s days was pretty minimal, but it was probably something like girls' registrations as far as a proportion for the game in those days might have been 1 in 1,000. Today it's 1 in 5.
Well, that's great. We'll talk about those early days in a moment. I'd love to hear any Laurie Daly stories you've got too.
He wasn't very good at tying his shoelaces either.
But Sia, you came across, and there weren't too many Polynesian players in rugby league. If you have a look, for instance, the Canberra Raiders in 1989, when they won the premiership, they had 7 local players, 7 players born in either Goulburn, either Queanbeyan or Canberra. They had 6 players from Queensland. They had John Ferguson, Dean Lance, who'd come across from playing in Sydney, an indication of, like there weren't many around. But now there's 45% of the players from Pacifica.
Yep.
Well, why has there been that incredible influx? Because why aren't they all playing rugby union back there? Are they sort of bloke rugby league?
Oh, they are. Just a lot of them that probably didn't qualify for the union come over to rugby league. But I was quite similar. I grew up watching rugby union a lot. I was actually, when I first came to Canberra, when I saw like Joe Roth and those guys saw the Brumbies, because we basically watched Brumbies always smash the Auckland Blues, in that era when they were very dominant around that rugby union career. But I always enjoyed the game of rugby league. How I actually came over to Australia and actually get a shot to be contracted here over to the Roosters was we came over for a football trip with our local football trip. We fundraised. We went over and played St Mary's and Penrith SG ball team at that time over in St Mary's, and I was fortunate enough that a few scouts were there. Some big fella come up to me after the game, said, "Hey, how you going? We've got Ricky Stewart over there. He wants to have a chat to you." So I was like, "Oh yeah." So I had a chat to Stick, and
That was when he was coaching the Roosters.
yeah, that was when he was coaching Roosters at the time. Sorry, and yeah, he asked me if like I was interested in actually moving over to Australia and come over to the Roosters, and I was like, "Oh look, I'll have a chat to Mum and Dad and see how we go." Went back into the sheds, and my mate's grandfather was like, "Do you know who that was?" And I was like, "Yeah, that was Ricky Stewart." And he was like, "No, you idiot, the other guy." And I was like, "Nah." Little did I know it was Arthur Beetson, one of the yeah, I was like, "Yeah, he was that guy." But yeah, it was Artie Beetson, and then you know, fast forward, I ended up signing with the Roosters, come over, still didn't know who Artie was. He picked me up from the airport, took me over and get all the papers done at the Leagues Club over there at Bondi Junction, and I was like, "Hey Artie, there's a picture of you there." And he was like, "Yeah mate, I used to play footy back in the day," and you know, the rest was history. And then I just got to know everything about rugby league, because obviously rugby union was quite a dominant sport over there in New Zealand. But yeah, when I came over here, like you said, there weren't too many that were in the first grade sort of arena. A few of them in the Bulldogs. I was probably quite similar to like Ruben Wiki when he came over, and he was probably, you know, a lot of the guys that we would look up to, you know, when we'd watch them on TV playing for New Zealand. A lot of them would play, that we would look up to in regards to rugby league was more the Warriors, because that was, we only had free-to-air TV, and the Warriors games were the only ones that we got to watch. So we didn't really get to watch many of the Australian teams only when it came to finals series, which you know, Canberra's was very, very dominant around that era, and I was fortunate enough to get to watch them. But yeah, coming from New Zealand and being a part of the NRL system and watching it grow, especially in the Pacifica space, it's been really awesome to see the numbers really grow right through.
How were you as a 19-year-old playing first grade, firstly? I think you played 19 games in that 2005 season, and then selected for New Zealand, but you had an injury. As a 19-year-old, how did you cope with playing against players who were far older and wiser to a certain degree? Yeah,
it was a bit of a shock, you know, obviously coming to Australia, I understood what my job was in terms of putting in all the hard work, but in terms of the culture and how to handle it all, we didn't really necessarily, there was no really playbook for that, you know. You sort of just had to sort of handle it on your own stride, try and work side by side with a lot of the guys that you really connected with. Ricky was always a really good mentor and still a good friend of mine. Being able to stay connected, stay grounded, but you know, the only knowledge, you know, that you can learn from the greatest is obviously experience. And so you know, being that young and being entrenched in you know, that very mature environment with all the guys, there was that gap, but there was still a really good connection, just given the nature of rugby league and how close we all have to be in order to sort of gain that trust to actually sort of go out there and play.
Like Ruben Wiki, you started in the centres and finished in the front row. So there you go. Well, Jason Croker actually started on the wing and finished in the front row. So
I've never seen too many go the other way, start in the front row and go.
One of the topics we're going to talk about is whether expansion has worked. I would argue that it's been at times 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You remember in 1997 when they joined, well, they had the 2 competitions going at the same time, and you had 22 teams, and by 2000 it was back to 14. Now we're 17. We're starting to talk about resurrecting the North Sydney Bears and putting them in Perth, and who remembers the Western Reds or the Adelaide Rams or the Hunter Mariners? I do, because the ABC had me calling them. So I was constantly on a flight to Adelaide Oval, to the Wacker, playing the Hunter Mariners in Newcastle. I mean, who thought that was a good idea to put another team in Newcastle up against the Newcastle Knights? You know, like, and it was a lot of hatred there in Newcastle towards it. I remember being in the middle of it at times when you'd walk out the ground and there'd be people with signs saying, you know, we don't want the Hunter Mariners, we don't want Super League. They were very much an ARL team, ARL town, with the Newcastle Knights. And we're seeing, obviously, expansion now with 17 teams, the South Queensland Crushers, another side, the Gold Coast Chargers. So there's a few embers there of teams. I guess we've got to take it slowly. You're on the board of the Canberra Raiders, Katrina. You'd know the nuts and bolts of this, and the bottom line is very important, but so is the expectation of success and how you manage that expectation.
Yeah, and I think the key, what didn't happen with the Western Reds, the Adelaide Mariners team, and to an extent the Hunter Mariners, the Adelaide Rams and the Hunter Mariners was a little bit different because of the Super League war that gave itself enough fuel to implode, but not enough lead in time to grow the pathway in location. I think one of the best things about the Raiders is the commitment to the South Coast, to the Riverina, to sort of bush communities and not just to Canberra and Queanbeyan. And I think that Redcliffe and now the Dolphins certainly a good example of making sure you get that pathway right and to keep committed to that. They're, 6 weeks ago, we had clubs sort of under the pump because they were having a week off in their bye week and going to Bali and those sort of things. The Dolphins took half their playing group and did a mini tour of the Northern Territory, which is per head of population, has the highest registrations for Rugby League, and they just saw it as heartland that's untapped, and so they've got a much better commitment to the pipeline and growing their own pathways than I think we've done in expansion before. And I know with the Raiders, the commitment to taking games to our catchment, whether it's pre-season or regular season, getting out to our regional community and making them feel like they're part of the Raiders family is incredibly important. Our strategy includes the conversion of local talent into NRL Raiders contracts and a real commitment to trying to optimise that, because then they're kids that have grown up in our community. People that follow the Raiders probably follow the Tuggeranong Bushrangers or the Gungahlin Bulls, and they see these kids coming through their own club systems, and it just builds a lot more momentum around the playing group, and it's a lot more sustainable for us as a club.
I think you're right there, because when the Raiders started, it was very much a local team born out of the Queanbeyan Blues. And if you remember that 1989 season, as I mentioned a moment ago, there were 7 local players, 7 locally bred players, if you include Laurie Daly. There were 7 local players, 6 from Queensland. It was very much a local team. I would argue that Rugby League has become almost mercenary now, because you've got players just moving from one club to the other. There doesn't seem to be that connection to the community as individuals, but as a club you do have that commitment. I think the Raiders have got 2 local born players in the team at the moment, or on the weekend anyway. Matt Frawley was born in Canberra, Zach Wolford was born in Canberra, Sebastian Chris came here when he was 8 years old. As you can see, Nick Kotrick I think was born in Cooma, but the rest are from everywhere, but we do regard them as our own. I think it's a sign of maturity more than anything else that we are accepting of players from elsewhere and adopt them as our own. We're all sad that Jack Whiten, for instance, is going. Been a great player for the Raiders, came across from Orange. We almost regard country New South Wales as our
Anything
own.
that's not on the coast is ours.
Yeah. What's that?
Anything not on the coast is ours.
Yeah, that's right. But that's the way that we feel about it, isn't it? That we feel as though, even though they're not born here, they're very much ours. And I think it's important in the maturity of rugby league.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that we, I know for me personally, when I first come to Canberra, Ricky spoke about that when Mal, and I think it was Mal Meninga, when he made the comment of you don't have to be from Canberra to be a Canberran, and I think we've all adopted that. That's definitely a quote that we tell a lot of the parents, a lot of the players when they come into Canberra, that we can make it as much as our own as we want to. Always, because we're like, being in the Wellbeing and Education Department, we help out with the communities and academies as well. And so we go out to the Riverinas, Moneros, we talk to those kids, and we deliver all the education parts. And, it's always nice to sort of be someone that's sort of been in the environment, to actually deliver messages from real-time experience. And I was born in New Zealand, travelled everywhere, but this is definitely a place I really love calling home. And so when I'm actually talking to people about the Canberra Raiders, it's actually it goes to a little bit deeper than when you're just actually spitting out facts. It's just real-time truth.
One of the good parts about rugby league back in those innocent days, 1989, my favourite year. But if you look back at 1989, you had the players having jobs. And so Gary Coyne owned the Video Easy shop, Main Street of Queanbeyan, had John Ferguson coming around to your work, putting fire extinguishers in. You could buy a car from Glenn Lazarus or Brent Todd. Mal was omnipresent, might have even been selling real estate. So they were just everywhere, the Raiders. It wasn't as if they turned up to training and trained full-time back in those days. They'd go to Seaford Oval and train from about 5 o'clock onwards, and they'd train till about, I remember some of them sort of training till about 10 o'clock at night. You'd have Father John Woods doing laps of the Oval as the club chaplain. Like, it was quite an extraordinary experience if you have a look back at it now. And then you had, as soon as Super League came in, you had players turning up in flash cars, no longer beaten up utes and driving mum and dad's car. They were roaring into the car park, and it was a different time. Can you remember that? Do you remember those days at all? Katrina and Laurie Daly, I mean, he had his name on the top of a trophy shop in Queanbeyan next to the Queanbeyan Leagues Club.
We used to be amused on the Friday night football when he had different jobs came up. Like, I think one time he was listed as a forklift driver. Never drove a forklift. And he was a greenkeeper at one stage. He might have turned up at the bowling club at Queanbeyan, which was next door to Seaford, a couple of times. But certainly seeing the impact on him and then family decision making when Super League came, because it was a quantum leap in professionalism and player contracts, and really for him, not having done much more at high school than play football, to be honest, some really big decisions to make sure that he was thinking about life after football. That was probably the first time I ever heard him even talk about those sort of decisions. But what Super League did, besides the sort of pressure and feeling like, well, we signed early on the thinking everyone was signing and now they're not, what have we got ourselves into? But certainly that difference in what they were now earning and what they were now responsible for, and trying to hold the legacy of the game together, really was the start of something very different for the game. And it did take it away from the catching up with everyone up the street and we're all working together to that's what you do full time now. And that took a while for, I think, all players to adjust to whatever side of the Super League war they were on.
That was one of my favourite parts of the Channel 10 broadcast back in those days, when they listed the players' occupations as they were about to kick a goal, or they'd score a try and they'd put their occupations at the bottom. And ours
was listening to Laurie on the radio and counting how many ums and ahs he'd say.
Well, it's funny you should mention Laurie, because he had a ghost-written column in the Canberra Times, written by Brad Turner, a journalist, about 30 years ago. And apparently Brad told me this story, that Brad or somebody else, that Laurie's English teacher from Journey was mightily impressed with Laurie's use of the English language. in his ghostwritten column in the Canberra Times. So,
Yeah, Mr. Brown actually lives at Kingston now and still makes comments, although Laurie does do a lot more media now, so he's sort of obviously improved a lot, but it was quite interesting in those days how quickly his English had improved.
yes, and spelling and grammar, exceptional. What about you? Did you have a job when you came to the Roosters in 2005, or had Super League sort of in the money in the game,
Yeah, no.
made it fully professional?
That was long gone.
Yeah.
My memory of Super League was when we were over in New Zealand and they obviously switched over to Super League.
Yep.
And so I was wondering why the team that would score a try would have to kick off again, so that, you know, when they sort of
That's
changed the
right.
rules. So
Yeah.
that was sort of my memory of Super League. But when I came over, yeah, we sort of just got the stories about the after effects that happened from Super League.
Yeah. In terms of being a professional, you didn't have to have a job playing rugby league in those days?
Because I was in school.
Yeah.
And then once I finished school, then I was fortunate enough to go into full-time training.
Yes. Craig Bellamy used to make the Melbourne Storm players go and work on a building site for a week.
Yeah.
before
Still
they-
does.
Yes.
Any
Still
new
does,
player
yeah.
still
I heard
does.
that.
So,
Yeah.
you know, those sort of things are so important, aren't they, to ground the players, just to make sure that they understand how privileged they are.
Yeah, that's right. And that's something that we try and tell, like a lot of our part-timers that aren't in the full-time system yet, really understand what the value of things are, because that's probably some of the things when guys sort of come straight into the full-time system, they get a lot of things done for them, you know, in terms of scheduling. They're financially stable, a lot of support sort of around them if they're in the NRL contract. And so what we try and tell a lot of the part-timers that are coming into that system is really understanding the value of, because they'll be working, a lot of those guys, they're just really getting understanding the value of how hard something is, you know, before they get it sort of given to them when they're in the full-time system.
Yes. Just on just how hard rugby league is, I would argue that it's tougher getting up now than it has ever been. It just seems to be so physical, so fast. And just how tough is it as a player? Because you see players just getting absolutely smashed and you think, well, how are they going to get up, let alone continue playing and then walk around the following day and play with the kids? You know?
Yeah, it's probably, Katrina could probably back me up on this. It's probably more the training that's probably a lot harder nowadays. When I see the guys, I always get asked the question, do I miss the game? To a degree, but when you actually see them training and all the amount of effort and work that actually sort of goes into that 80 minutes on the field, Alan Tung always talks about it all the time in terms of 10,080 minutes that we have throughout the week, the actual 10,000 minutes that you have to look after yourself, prepare yourself for that 80-minute period. There's a lot that really goes into it. And the game part of it, it's more of you're just ready and you're actually, I guess when you're doing anything, when you're sort of preparing something, like if you're going for a dance or whatever, because we're in the entertainment business, you're actually performing.
Yeah.
But all the things that lead up to that, that's all the hard slogging, because you have to get up. You have, whether you want to or not, you have to do your weights. You have to do the conditioning. You have to do the wrestling sessions.
And you've got a stack of kids too, so they all want you to play with
no,
Dad.
that's right.
Hey?
And so you got to be calculated in how you sort of manage your time and energy.
Yeah.
And you know, on top of that, you got club commitments as well. So yeah, there's a lot that really goes into
You're
it.
not too sore to pick up the kids?
I was, but now I'm all good now.
But when you were playing?
When I was playing,
Yeah.
no, it was. I sort of had like a time limit, with all the kids and stuff like that. I'll be like, all right, Daddy's got to rest now. And so put all the ice packs on, and then they'll start playing with the ice packs and all that. So, all right, kids, get away.
What about you, Katrina? What was the hardest part? The pre-season training, the preparation, or the games themselves?
Probably the first couple of weeks of games. There's nothing like match fitness. Those first couple of Mondays, waking up after actual games, always felt much sorer than late in the season, even though the games were a lot higher intensity by then. But I think Sia's point's right. I watch our girls train at the moment, and there's a big difference between hitting a tackling bag for 20 minutes of training and hitting each other for 20 minutes of training. And they've gone to the days of sort of light contact. It's the whole training week is game-like now. There's no sort of difference between that and what you might do on a game day. For us, half of the things that was difficult was, train Thursday night, Friday night we'd be at Mawson selling raffle tickets to pay for referees on Saturday. So we were sort of juggling a lot more of those sorts of things than probably the physical elements that the athletes juggle today.
There's still an element of that, isn't there, in women's rugby league, because it's only a short season and you still have to work. They've still got jobs. I think the wage at the moment is $32,000. It's going to be increased to 62, 67 in about 4 or 5 years' time. But still got to work and still got to get to training and play and recover.
Yeah, 32,000 is not bad for if you just purely look at the 12 weeks. But if the players aren't doing something the other 40 weeks, then you can't make it to the 12 weeks. So, it really is money that's meant to cover the time that you're playing in the NRL competition. But the girls have to find the same amount of training hours for the other 40 weeks that they're not getting paid as well. So we've been lucky with our playing squad of the 24. I think we've been able to find at least part-time work for the majority of them. Some were lucky to have a couple. One of the girls, for example, works for Auckland University and is working from here and kept her job. Yeah. So that's things are starting to be a bit more flexible. I think COVID helped a little bit with that. But a lot of the girls haven't started careers yet, so they're really just taking part-time jobs in quite manual or sort of casual type of things because it's just easier to pick up and move, and they're really desperately following their dream of playing the NRLW because they're a long time retired, and they'll start on their second career once that dream's done.
Did you have a manager when you were playing?
To manage what? Nothing like that.
You would have had a manager,
Sia? Yeah, same one as Loz, actually. Steve Gillis. Yeah.
Chimes, yeah.
Yeah.
How much did you get in your first contract?
30.
30,000 at the Roosters, yeah?
Yeah.
2005?
Yeah.
Not bad for a 19-year-old?
Yeah.
I reckon my career cost me that much.
Yeah, so I was very, very lucky.
Yeah. Wanted to, just on the Canberra Raiders, and given we are in Canberra, we've got the green lights here, we've got the theme going, and you're on the board, Sia played for the Raiders. Who do you think the most influential person has been when it comes to the Raiders, apart from the McIntyre family, which of course instrumental in setting up the team, but I know a lot of people say Mal straight away, but was he the most influential, do you think?
Look, what he was influential in was the sort of players that were attracted to the club once he was here. I guess that it depends how you measure it. I'd probably look at some of the players in our harder years that keep things together. I think once sort of Mal signed, there's an avalanche of great players signing up. It's sort of easy to be successful then. So I look at someone like Tangi, who, or even Jared Croker, who, what an amazing achievement to be, third or fourth all-time point scorer in a team that hasn't won a grand final. He's played very little representative football. For probably 2/3 of that time, we were barely a top 8 side. So to have some players who still can show that come from the region, for me, that's the sort of ingredient that shows that we're serious about our bigger commitments and those sort of things. So Mal certainly helped with the success and attracting players, but for me, the sign of good teams is sort of on our hardest days, who do we look to? And some of those guys have been that. And I'm sure if when Mal was playing, we were having those hard times, he'd have lifted us out of it, but he had a different era to sort of navigate. And I think I've got a lot of respect for some of those players who gave a lot more went probably above and beyond for the club when it was tougher, when it wasn't media beating down our door because we've, stacked with glamour side, where we, it was harder chasing sponsors and those sort of things. They absolutely did extras and worked really hard with the playing group around them to bring the best out of them. And so, I sort of look at it that way.
Alan Tongue didn't have a manager through his career, managed himself. And I said to him one day, I said, a bit hard to negotiate with another club, given you're playing with this one, if you're your own manager. He said, I know what I'm worth. So that's fair enough.
Good point.
Jared Croker, he's one of my favourite players. I'll tell you why. He's so humble, he's so unassuming, nothing seems to rattle him. I asked him about social media one day and I said, listen, you cop a bit on social media and does it impact you on? He said, no, most of the people that get stuck into me on social media are my mates. They kept reminding me about that missed goal kick at Canberra Stadium against the West Tigers. He said, they're the ones that get stuck. He said, don't really care. And he tells a lovely story actually last year when he got dropped in New South Wales Cup. He's coming back from injury. And he tells this story about how humbling it is playing in New South Wales Cup when your dad drives you to the big Merino at Goulburn, waiting for the bus to go to Sydney, and then you play and you catch the bus home and there's your dad waiting for you at the big Merino once you finish playing. You said, how humbling is that? Whereas the first graders are flying up, staying in nice hotels, ferried to the game, and there's poor old Jared, but he did the hard yards and an absolute champion according to those around him. So such an influence and a positive influence on those young players. So you are right. I love the Jared Croker influence on the Canberra Raiders. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, probably like obviously with the obvious with Mal, Sticky, Jared, all the points that Katrina pointed out. For me, personally, from a Pacifica point of view, and probably the same points as well as Big Papa, Josh Bali. He came through that era where it was probably a tough period there, but he's been a really just an influential player in our squad. He probably was at that period where we were probably struggling a bit, but he was still the guy that was able to get selected for Australia and Queensland consistently. We've looked to him, on numerous occasions for us to get us out of trouble.
He's become a cult hero, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And they call him Big Papa now,
Yeah.
and he's got his mullet going.
He needs a few more dollars in his contract so he can pay for the other half.
But and a lot of the players out there, given that Jamal Fogarty, when played for the Gold Coast Titans, got run down by Josh Papali'i. So they've all got swimming costumes, all that sort of thing, with them sort of run down by Papa. So so they do remind Jamal Fogarty that he was run down by a prop when he was 30 metres in front.
No, they remind him because they made budgie smugglers out of them too.
They made the costumes out. The other player of enormous influence, before I get onto my player that I reckon was the most influential, Ruben Wiki, when he came to town, and Ruben signed 2 contracts, which wasn't legal at the time. He signed with both the Raiders and the Auckland Warriors, the New Zealand Warriors, Auckland back in those days. It went to court, and in the end, Ruben stayed in Canberra, thankfully. But he used to have a couple of stories about Ruben, and one that he always used to get suspended when his wife went away. He just sort of lost his compass a bit. But the other one was he was just so giving to people around the club. And I have this story because I was there. Tony Wood, who is Victor the Viking, suffered a heart attack, and he was convalescing anyway. So Ruben decided, along with David Ferner, that they'd do a backyard blitz for Tony's backyard, and they laid grass and they laid a lot of landscaping in Tony's backyard while Tony was away. Tony came home, and of course it was a big surprise. But to me, that's Ruben Wiki to a T.
I was lucky enough when Ruben was here to play union with Santa, his wife. And we played for Easts, and I remember one presentation night at the Deakin Sports Club, and Santa got, for the first time, the club gave the club player of the year to a female, and she won it. And Reuben walked around all night in the jersey that they'd given her, going, you know, I'm, you know, that's my wife, and she's the best footballer in our house. And like, he was just this fantastic. He was at all the games. He'd run the water for us. Yeah, just a brilliant guy. And his sister actually played in the first Kiwi Test team as well.
Okay. Yeah. You know who I look back in of all the players, and I love Mal, Laurie. I used to get so excited when Laurie got the ball, because he's 100 mile an hour. But Glenn Lazarus, if you ever look at the influence Glenn Lazarus had on not just the Raiders, but he went from the Raiders to the Broncos after 91. So he's played in 2 premierships, 1989, 90. He's played in the grand final 91. He's gone to the Broncos. They won the premiership 92 with Lazo. He's left the Broncos, I think, in 96 or 97. The following year, the Melbourne Storm have won the premiership. I mean, 3 premierships from one player.
Oh, his only failing was that handstand he tried to do after the grand final with the Melbourne Storm. Cartwheel or whatever it was. But
he's lost 58 kilos. Looks totally
looks good.
different.
Looks good. But you're right. And as a front rower, and really changed how those roles were seen to sort of be built around rather than expendable, especially early on with so many more interchanges, and he adapted as the game changed around him as well.
Just on Indigenous players, so we've got 12% players who are Indigenous in the competition, yet we've got no referee, no coaches who are first grade coaches who are Indigenous.
Not in the NRL, but 60% of the NRLW coaches are.
Isn't that great? How do we get
Jamie Soward, Scott Prince, those sort of guys?
How do we get more in NRL?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because we have such a structured pathway program for players, but not for coaches, and I think it's very similar probably for Pacifica as well. And really, until we sort of make a really dedicated effort to give opportunities in coaching systems for that sort of experience, we won't see that sort of happen. So certainly we don't have any lack of numbers coming through. Probably JT's the closest at the moment, doing a little bit of coaching with Queensland. But out of that sort of, Greg Inglis and that sort of era of players, they're not really converting into coaching roles. They're not giving opportunities for those to be sort of genuine career starters for them. So certainly with Indigenous Council, that's something that we're focusing on and trying to use the Indigenous All-Stars coaching roles as pathways to elite coaching opportunities. We don't have as much influence over the club, so we're trying to do it through New South Wales and Queensland systems in the representative processes to show that these former players have, particularly for many of them who just sort of understood and read the game so well, to provide those sort of opportunities, because certainly, like you said, with that over-representation of numbers, more than 1 in 10 players, you'd think that should equate to 1 or 2 NRL head coaching roles as well.
Yeah, so tough job coaching, isn't it? You cop it from everywhere. Have you been in the box with Ricky?
No.
No.
That's how much I sort of stay away from coaching.
During COVID, it was interesting next to our boxes where they put the opposition coaches, and the week we played Melbourne Storm, security got called because the people on the other side of that thought the board was having a blue. They didn't realise that part of our box had been cordoned off, and it was actually Bellamy going off during one of the games. He's a firecracker for sure.
Yeah, my favourite about coaches, of course, is that because we broadcast right next to coaches, and you hear them yelling down messages, telling him he'll never play first grade again if he doesn't catch the ball. So anyway, the message once it gets to the players is you're going really well, just keep on focusing. And so I see it a lot because in New South Wales Cup, because we're not actually calling at the time, but we do hear pretty plainly what's happening in terms of the coach. So you do hear, but once the message gets out onto the field, it's...
The interesting part to watch is whoever's got the headset on the bench, because they look up at the box and you can see them going, I hear what you're saying, I don't know what I'm going to tell the runner.
That's the filtering.
They're trying to translate
It's the filtering process, we call it. How they sort of filter the message to how he receives it. No, just an extension to what Katrina was sort of talking about as well from coaching. Obviously, commentary is probably another thing as well.
Yeah.
Trying to get just people out there in the media space, whether it's in the lens or in the background, whether it be Pacifica or Indigenous. I think it's just probably a huge thing that we can try and promote and recognise and make it aware that, you know, these pathways, you know, for these guys to, you know, try and normalise these things or give a lot more confidence to a lot of kids that are sort of growing up to say, well, if, you know, rugby league's probably not playing might not be the right pathway, but, you know, there are these other avenues where I can talk about the game, love about the game and express, you know, and give my contribution to the game in different avenues.
On the weekend, I commentated Parramatta versus the Warriors at Parramatta Stadium, Combank Stadium, and Dean Hallertau was my co-commentator.
Yep.
A very proud Pacific man, but had Rowan Sims on the sideline, and she'd played in a rugby league game in the NRLW in a trial game, and then raced across to be the sideline eye at Combank Stadium.
Probably 10 hours later, she was starting a shift as a firey. She's still an active firefighter for New South Wales as well.
Yeah. Anyway, we've chatted for a while. We're going to open it up now to questions. If anybody's got some questions, we do have a microphone, so.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you've got a question, can you wait for the microphone because we're streaming and for people using the hearing loop. So put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question and I can direct it that way. So, okay. Don't be shy. Okay, down the front.
Yep, they're coming. Yep.
Both ends.
I suppose this is really for Tim, but Sia would know he started with one referee and two linesmen. We then got two referees and two linesmen. Now they're supposed to be human and prone to make mistakes.
Yeah.
So we did away with the second referee and we put a bloke in the bunker. And they make mistakes. Which do you prefer, the bunker or the two referees?
I probably still prefer the bunker, really, because we actually get referees that we had Benny Cummings and that come in, and I actually asked that question, what it's like to going back to one. He said there was a little bit of confusion when you sort of have the two, and that was probably the general feel around the referees. Going back to one, it obviously makes things like a little bit harder in terms of ruck recognition, but definitely in terms from having one person to consult and interpret the game in live time, it was probably a lot more easier, more manageable, and a lot more smoother in that as well, with that respect. But yeah, obviously with the bunker and that as well, we all have our opinions, and yeah, I'll probably keep my opinion to myself. But yeah.
I would agree. I think it's far simpler to follow because when you had the ruck referee, it was you weren't sure who you were supposed to be looking at, and I know the players were confused. So yeah, I don't mind. Like the bunker, at least gives you something to talk about, I guess. And they do it in slow mo. And
Actually, speaking to one referee, is that still going? Actually, speaking to one referee, he did mention that he would like to see the viewers have a few other angles that they probably that the viewers probably aren't privy to, that what the bunkers probably recognise to, and that might cause a lot less confusion.
Intervene if they notice a glaring mistake by the referee.
that's a good question.
I
think so, because. But sometimes the game has moved on by the time the bunkers had a look and seen an infringement, a knock-on or whatever. So it's part of the game to a certain degree, because there are mistakes made, but you just get on with it. And with the bunker being in Redfern, like it's not at the ground, so it's a fair way away. Decisions get made quickly, but I just think, well. It's okay. Okay as it is. We keep tinkering with it. I wouldn't like to see it tinkered anymore with another two referees or another referee.
Thank you. Is that on? Yeah. Thank you, Sia, Katrina and Tim. I'm wondering, in Australia we've got a battle for eyeballs, a battle for the dollar, a battle for players. And for a game, any of the games, the 4 football codes in Australia to not only survive, but to thrive, how does Rugby League approach that? And is that about expansion into new markets, or is it in fact about building the core of the game and using that as the fundamentals to grow the game over time when there's just so much competition out there?
Two things for me in that. The growing and maintaining the game, especially in the bush, is just incredibly important. I don't know if we're quite getting that right. And I think just moving the deck chairs around about what sport kids play isn't enough. The data sort of tells us that after 12 and up to 18, we have almost a cliff that our kids fall off as far as participation in sport. So I think that's an incredible challenge for all 4 codes. And as far as growing the markets, it's more about how do you diversify the income in a way that's sustainable. So maybe a little less reliance on or over-reliance on some of the ways that income's generated. But certainly using streaming and other platforms to make the game more accessible for people to watch in real time is important. And they've done a fairly good job at that. I still think, and I think Rugby Union hit this hurdle when they expanded into South America and to South Africa and into Asia. When you start having games happen at a time that our kids can't and our families can't watch the game because it's 2 a.m, once you lose followers, they're hard to get back. And so we need to do things that are at family-friendly times, that are at viewer-friendly times, and in ways that make the game more appealing to more people. And most of the data tells us that the closer a competition is, the more times the lead changes during a game, the more engaged fans are with it. And so the best thing that we can do is to make sure there's a really strong pipeline of players coming through to the elite level, and to make sure that the competition is managed in a way that makes sure that all clubs have something to cheer about and something to follow. That we don't have a system where it's sort of the haves and the have-nots just based on what funding you might have in the bank.
Rugby League's tried to kill itself so many times, whether it be Super League, the Super League war, kicking South Sydney out of the competition, North Sydney Bears, amalgamating clubs that don't like each other, and various off-field issues. It's tried very hard to do its own massacre, but it seems to grow back like a triffid, doesn't it, Rugby League, which is good. One of the big issues, but just on that too, in terms of the popularity of Rugby League, you ever look at the top programs on Fox Sports, Rugby League is still very, very popular. Might only get 15,000 to a game, but it is enormously popular still on television. One of the things that I think Rugby League has to be very wary about in terms of getting numbers, young players playing, is concussion, because you can see that parents in particular are taking a keen interest in concussion and whether or not a code is doing enough to police it and protocols in place. I know the players, you probably experience this, Sia, where players don't want to come off. You can see them arguing with the medicals on the field, and the decision's been made remotely by a doctor watching it on television.
Yeah, and they've obviously put things in place and enforced fines and stuff like that in order to protect the players and obviously the game in itself. So we don't have these players sort of leaving the game and forcing to sort of retire it and then try and sue them later on. So there's there are some things put in place for the safety of the players and obviously just to try and promote a really safe game.
Yeah. Hopefully.
We have time for one more question.
See, I'd like to thank you for the work you do for the disadvantage in Canberra when you're playing. It shows you the community connection that we like to see the players have. But my question does relate to expansion, and it relates to the possibility of a Pacifica team, either based in PNG or Fiji, coming into the competition for giving the identity for those communities.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's, definitely high interest in a lot of Pacifica, in all the Pacifica communities, in order to create a team. I think the question is where would you put it, first and foremost, and then how would it sort of be run, and like Katrina was sort of talking about, was it's more so just trying to trying to strengthen what we sort of got at the moment. And I think if there was an opportunity, I think the NRL would really recognise that, with the game sort of growing in the Pacifica space, that there could be an opportunity to sort of have a base somewhere. But I think we got to really sort of try and pilot something first and foremost, maybe like a junior team or a pathway team or something like that, to see how they would sort of navigate that, because you're not just talking about one country, you're talking about multiple countries as well. I guess they've got it with the Moana Pacifica team in the rugby union, so maybe that could be a platform that we can sort of bounce some ideas off and maybe learn from.
Because you've got the PNG.
Well,
hunters.
certainly, yeah. So we have PNG Hunters in the Queensland Cup and Fiji Bati coming through New South Wales Cup. So I think they're learning a lot about also what does that take out of the teams travelling to those locations. There's no doubt in both locations, there's a good fan base, but the infrastructure and some of those sort of things. So it's a longer term project for it to be in country versus something even maybe New Zealand based as a stepping stone into the Pacific, or another location in Australia, but certainly something that's being strongly looked into, given such strong representation in the player registrations that we see at the moment.
And there's enormous support too for the Warriors at the moment, even more so than the Auckland Blues rugby union side. So there is a feeling that there might be room to base another team in New Zealand. While ever there's a 17th team competition, there'll always be speculation about where's the next team going to come from, because you don't want the bias system to continue.
Okay, well, thank you. Look, before we finish, I'd like to invite John Brock, cousin of Tom Brock, to give a vote of thanks for our panellists for the evening. So.
Thank you, Mary Louise. It's great to see a crowd here, and my relation to Tom is that Tom's father, Sid, was my grandfather John's brother, so I was his second cousin. Yeah, and although I was born in Sydney, I have a great love of Canberra, because in 1978 I worked down here for 12 months in my country time as a surveyor, and I played for the HMAS Harmon in the local competition, and we played captain's flat one day, and Gary Marmont was the captain of that team, and his nephew was the ball boy, Ricky Stewart, on that day. So I think we might have beaten captain's flat that day, I'm not too sure, but anyway, on behalf of the Tom Brock Committee, and two of my compatriots are here, Andrew and Richard, we'd like to thank very much Katrina, Sia and Tim for giving their time to explain the issues of the sports from Pacifica and First Nations and women's sport. And unfortunately last week I was listening to that game that Tim broadcast, because I come from Parramatta and they got flogged by the Warriors. So thank you very much indeed, we really appreciate it. On behalf of the Brock family, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And that was a great, second, are you sure it's only second cousin or about seventh cousin possibly? I hope you can join us in the foyer for light refreshments and a chance to take a look at Grit and Gold, Tales from a Sporting Nation. And a reminder also that our library bookshop is open and it has plenty of copies of the excellent exhibition book. It's a terrific little book actually on hand. So please join me once again in thanking Sia Soliola, Katrina Fanning, Tim Gavel and the sports history community for tonight's event. Thank you.